Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday, and welcome to our virtual engagement for Student Org series. This is a series that we're doing as a collaboration between four universities: DePaul University, Maryville University, Simpson College, and University of Central Oklahoma, where we've been getting together to discuss topics to help our different student organization communities through this fall quarter, since we know it is quite different for a lot of our student leaders. So thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Before we get started, we're going to start with introductions. So just share a little bit about you. So who you are, what you do at your school, and how about something fun here? A little icebreaker, a team builder, if you will. How about your favorite local food from your area? So or your favorite food from where your school's located. So Naomi, let's have you go first.
Okay. I'm Naomi Ishihara. I am the program coordinator for student involvement at Maryville University in St. Louis. And so part of my role encompasses advising the campus activities board and the Center for Student Engagement student workers, amongst a lot of other things, but those are my two very primary roles. I know that everyone kind of feels like there's a whole laundry list, but yeah. And so what you said, local food. I like a local restaurant. I don't like the local food in St. Louis. The pizza here is, I'm from Chicago, so the pizza here in comparison is bad. But there's this place called Max Local Eats. It has these burgers, they're smash burger style, but they have rib fries. So it's like the red hot riblets that's coated onto the fries. That's probably going to be my favorite burger place here.
Nice. Rigo.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rigo. I'm also at DePaul University. I advise the DePaul Activities Board. I get to work with Sarah, who advises our late night program. Let's see. So my favorite food, okay, I should say a little bit more of what that means. So I work with all our programming committees, Blue Demon Week, and any other campus initiatives that come out throughout the year. So in Chicago, I live at Uptown. So there's a lot of Asian restaurants that are lined up. I don't know that I have one favorite one. So my dinners usually consist of me rotating Asian restaurants, because it's Asia on Argyle. I don't know if you've ever gotten off Argyle on the Red Line, but it's all the Asian restaurants, and so I rotate typically there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Ellen.
Hello, my name is Ellen Ig. I'm the assistant director at the University of Central Oklahoma in our student engagement office. So I work with our dance marathon program called Broncothon. I work with Homecoming, which is almost happening here on our campus, and then our Leader Shape Institute. And I'm trying to think. I love meat, and so Oklahoma also likes meat usually, and they have some good steak. So I'm going to go with that. There's a really great place in one of our areas called Cattleman's. It's one of the oldest restaurants you can go to get some good steak. Even on Christmas, their holiday parade, they release cattle and steer. They run down the road. So we have.
That sounds like something you would love. Oklahoma is perfect for you right now with that. Yeah. And our other Iowan on the call today, Sarah Rudy.
Yeah, I'm laughing so hard because it sounds like something that would happen in Iowa. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Rudy. I'm the coordinator for student organizations and campus activities at DePaul. So yeah, I work with all of our student organizations. I work with D-Hub, our student organization platform. And I also work with Welcome Week, involvement fairs, midnight breakfast, and then, like Rico mentioned earlier, DePaul After Dark. So yeah, I'm excited about this upcoming quarter and getting to see everyone and share what we're learning in this virtual environment. I think my favorite, and I bet Rigo and Courtney already know, is I'm going to say home slice. When I was back in Iowa quarantining, I just missed home slice every day. So I've already ate it 3 times since I came back to Chicago.
What kind of food did they have?
Oh, it's pizza.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Not Chicago style pizza, a different kind of pizza.
No, it's just regular pizza, but it's really good.
Yeah. Well, panelists, thanks so much for joining us today. So for our viewers, as you may know, so we're going to be talking about team building, because obviously in a virtual environment, team building looks quite different than it does when you're able to be in a room together and have small talk or walk to and from meetings together. So really, to get us started here, I'm curious if y'all can talk a little bit about why team building is important for student organizations, particularly in this virtual time.
So in my opinion, I'm a big advocate for team building because I think it creates a more vulnerable atmosphere and will then allow you to trust each other and find support in each other. And I think if you can do that, you're going to be a stronger organization. And I think team building facilitates all or can facilitate all of those different things. And so that would be the main reasons I would advocate for it. And within the virtual space, you can't usually in person you have those informal conversations, and so that's why it's even more important to have intentional times where you set aside time to get to know each other and create those bonds that you normally would in person.
I agree. I think, excuse me, I think it's like that vulnerability, Ellen, that you talked about. Like I have, my personality, I'm not very willing to be very vulnerable, but I do. I am willing to learn about others, and then I offer that as well for myself. So I think that it does create a level of trust, just because, I mean, in this virtual environment, there's so many Zoom meetings and this and that you're just exhausted. So once you have that team building, you're more likely to be engaged and listen to what's happening in the efforts that you have, right? Because if it's just going to be face value meetings all day with people that you don't really know, you're not going to care as much as you would if you really got to know someone, right? The other thing, it just helps in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think something that Rigo and I have talked about is building that community piece. So students might be missing out on that if they are, not on campus or not in Chicago for us. And so having that team building, even in a virtual manner, will help them feel that community piece that they might not be getting in a traditional sense this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like with everybody not being able to be in the same physical spaces, it's different when you can't just like meet with somebody at Brownstones or like whatever like local coffee shop you have like at your campus and talk about like an upcoming meeting or event that you have. You're gonna have to really like rely a lot more on that relationship piece to be able to make things happen successfully. And so I think team building is more important now more than ever, and a lot of clear communication and being able to build relationships across different groups is going to be even more key now, because you can't just prioritize a task. Like you really have to find that balance.
Yeah. Well, and I think that speaks to people are craving connections now more than ever. Like it's so easy to be isolated and be alone. And, even when people do go outside or to places, at least in Chicago, I mean, they're nervous about being within 6 feet of each other. So I think connections are really, really critical in this time, because what I oftentimes talk about, especially with new students, is right now, this is your foundation for your relationships moving forward. And like at DePaul, we are mostly remote right now, but this is your chance to create a foundation for the community that you're going to be part of for the next 2 quarters or the next few years, or even moving forward, right? Like at DePaul, you're not only joining your student organization, you're joining this alumni network of 190,000 people. So those connections are really, really important. And it's important for student leaders to start to facilitate them. So, I'm curious here if we can have, folks talk a little bit about what's the difference between team building and icebreakers, right? Because like what we did might have been a little bit of an icebreaker, right? So I'm just curious if people can talk a little bit further about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think icebreakers a lot of times is I think it's still like relationship building, but I think it's more so like getting everybody to like be more comfortable about being in this space, or what, whether it's like a virtual space or in person. I think icebreakers are more so like getting people going, getting people started. And then I think team building is more so like finding the connection and finding like the commonalities and like really delving deeper into like what people's goals are and how you can work together to solve problems and critical thinking and like work together to achieve a common goal. Whereas like icebreakers is more so kind of like building that like social fabric. I think team building is more so getting groups to accomplish things together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's almost like where you have more discussion, like you're saying, where you can critically think together or discuss a common problem or hear differences and expand your thought and point of view. And so they usually take a little bit more time, in my opinion, where the icebreakers are quick and just really quick and to the point a little bit, where the team builders can dive deeper into a topic.
Yeah, I like to consider icebreakers as the chance for everyone to make sure that their voice is heard, right? And that, because I think that there's this process in group dynamics where you go about, well, Ellen will laugh at this because Ellen and I went to grad school together, but there is a, oh my gosh, why am I suddenly blanking on it? I talk about it all the time. The group dynamics. Who's the theorist who did it? Forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning.
Model.
Yeah, Tuckman's model. Thanks, Rigo. Yeah, come on, Ellen. You're supposed to come. Yeah,
I was going to say Tucker.
Yeah, there's this model for group dynamics of forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, which it's the 5 stages of group dynamics. And in the forming stage, it's when you initially convene. But then what they talk about in the storming stage is that people start to learn what your group norms are. And I think icebreakers are really important because it helps people say or start to like realize how they can talk and be reaffirmed, even if it's like small things, like I like to ask people, what's your favorite pair of shoes? Because you're always be amazed. Like, my favorite pair of shoes are Adidas Superstars. And I almost always get somebody that says like, oh my gosh, I love Adidas Superstars. And that reaffirmation makes me feel more comfortable speaking in a large group environment. So it's important to do icebreakers like that because it's these really low level things, low hanging fruit, right? That people can start to get those affirmations and they can understand that their voice will be heard. And that standard of like how you reaffirm each other and how you talk about things, it starts when you're talking about like things that might not necessarily seem important, because you learn in that stage so that when you go further into your conversation, you can have those norms and those responses tested out a little bit, right? So it's important to let people have that comfortable environment from the get-go.
Yeah, I think it also can like icebreakers also kind of like help pique your interest for like maybe getting to know like a person that's like part of the group. Or it may remind you of like different experiences that you've had, like if it's a group that already knows each other that you've had with that group. Like as I was talking about food, I remembered like NACA in Denver, Colorado, and I remember Naomi and I like went to like a lot of different restaurants, and like that's what, as I was talking, you asked an icebreaker question that's not related to that, but I was thinking about like how Naomi and I got ramen and like all these different places that we went to when we were in Denver. And I think that kind of like happens like for students too, like, oh, like I'm a new this is my first quarter, I'm trying to get to know people, and I think like even icebreakers like that, like maybe they're not building a relationship in that moment, but like they can lead to something like that.
Yeah, I like that because it's like it takes it a step further, right? You ask about food, and then the team builders like eating the meal together. Like we were able to convene over a meal or team. I keep wanting to say team breakers. That's not what that's not what they are in my head. I just keep wanting to say it. Team builders. It's like you can convene and communicate and sometimes debate over a project, right? Over a task. So for me, icebreakers are something where I can talk to most people and have a lot of that kind of that forming those little like norms and those social cues and everything. But the team builders are what I do when I want to sit down and eat with someone, right? It's like then you're finding everyone's kind of tastes and habits and everything like that and preferences. So it's a really my family is a big like my parents own a restaurant, so our family and food is really big for me. That's how I kind of build that relationship through that. So that's why I love that you bring that up, because it was a really awesome and very natural feeling experience.
Yeah, so shifting gears here a little bit, I'm curious if we can talk a little bit about some of the barriers for team building you frequently hear from student organization leaders and how the leaders of those organizations can work to address it.
I personally think the most common one I hear is very simple is be like, oh, we're virtual, I can't do that. And it's not possible to do this normal team builder that I normally would have done in person, whether that's like Maybe it's doing charades or, like, I don't really know. But they're saying they can't do it because now you're virtual, and that barrier of being on screen sometimes is so great that they just can't think creatively past that or think outside the box of how can I morph this to work. And so that's what I like to talk to the students about, it to say, well, don't just jump to you can't. How can you flip it and say, what can you do, or how can you think outside the box and think creatively to make this work on a screen? Because with whatever platform you're utilizing, there's a lot of different options that you can put into play, whether that's doing some breakout rooms or using the whiteboard function, or sending private chats to give those messages, or bringing in online resources. Like, there's a lot of different things you can do before you say, I can't do that. And so really challenging them to think a little more creatively is, I think, key for building.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think in conversations that I've had with some student leaders over the past couple of weeks, is just like Zoom fatigue and technology fatigue is real right now for, staff, students, everyone. And so I think just trying to figure out how to make it different than their classroom experience, just sitting on a Zoom call, how do you use the different features? How do you bring different games like charades, you mentioned, Ellen? I know that we did that with the activities board at the retreat, and that was super fun. And something different, like they're not just like sitting on a call. But I think that's one of the biggest barriers, is like finding the time to think that creatively and like think out of the box, and then doing it is something that has definitely been brought up.
Yeah, and I think that students, I am a staff professional for this class that we have at DePaul called Chicago Quarter. And one of my students in the first class that we had, of course, we started with like we did a very basic icebreaker, go around and share something. And, before it even began, we put a topic in the chat so that they started to chat there too. And one of the students, when it was his turn to speak, he actually said, he's like, this is my first time speaking in a class, and it's my third class of the day. And I really think, like, there's people are looking again for that connection. Mm-hmm. And like Sarah said, like Zoom fatigue, technology fatigue is very, very real. So I think like it's really important for student leaders to understand the nuances and the ins and outs of how this technology works, so it doesn't just turn into a presentation, right? And it doesn't just turn into like a student leaders talking at people, because quite bluntly, that can be an email. Like, people are showing up to these experiences because they want to engage, right? So you've got to like learn the technology so that you can create the virtual environments that will allow for them to do that.
And I also think, like, you talk about people not speaking. I think it's important as a group to pay attention to that as leaders, to figure out who is and who's not engaging, and to not be afraid to have conversations with those people, to challenge them, or to invite people into the space to say, oh, we haven't heard from you, Sarah. Would you like to share what your thoughts are on this? And kind of bring them in, because sometimes people might need that as well.
Yeah. That's like the informal team building, I think, too. Just those like check-ins are super important now more than ever, because we don't know what's going on the other side of the screen. We don't know what's going on in the family, like things like that. And so I think that's a team building, even though it's not a game, it's not in the meeting, but it's still super important.
Mm-hmm. I think another challenge too is, like, even when students are trying to take that risk and maybe have an activity that they do in person and have it online, I think sometimes you hit a barrier like halfway through the activity and realize, oh wait, like this is not the same kind of like mechanics of an activity. And so an example that I have is also from Chicago Quarter, which I'm also part of the teaching team for. We did that activity where, like, you ask people, like, you stand in a circle, ask people their name, and then an adjective. So like reading Rigo was mine because it starts with an R, and alliteration is great. But then everybody's Zoom screen was in a different order. Mm-hmm. And so like people were having, and we knew that coming in, but we thought like, okay, well, people will figure it out. But people were having a really hard time remembering like the order, because like they had to say like the sequence. And then, so like everybody's was like looking at the groups like in a different format, and so like people had a really hard time like memorizing the names, because like part of like the memory of that game is that you memorize like the order and where people are standing. And so I think some of the challenges are like, yes, you're like, we're trying to like reformat some things that we do in person that we know and we love and we know that they work, but sometimes like you're already doing it and halfway through it you'll find out that, oh, like maybe this wasn't the best. So I think it's a constant like negotiation of like maybe like pulling the pieces of it that could work online and then leaving some parts out.
And if you're not sure, then practice beforehand.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
you may not know that until you're like, oh yeah, even though you knew the pictures were different, until you started facilitating it, you're like, oh.
Yes, it's harder.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so we're starting to lean into this next part of the conversation a little bit here too. But what are some of the most successful virtual team building experiences or icebreakers you've seen? Or I guess team building techniques, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay, I can talk. I mean, I know that I just talked, but like I just thought of something. So kind of like I think Sarah mentioned something about a retreat that we had recently. So we've been using a lot of storytelling. So like a lot of our team building activities have had like some sort of like storytelling component, and I think it's really worked very well for our leadership team and DAB. I don't know, Courtney's laughing at me because like she knows that I talk a lot, maybe, I don't know.
Oh no, I'm laughing actually because one of Ellen, Naomi, and my mutual friends are texting us right now, and it was hi Allie, thanks for watching. I am listening, but it was also pretty funny.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
No, so it's worked really well for our leadership team. So like a lot of our activities, like the most recent one, Connor, our DAB president, actually came up with that activity. He came up with like 5 different prompts of like find like 5 different pictures, like one picture that means like fun to you, a picture that means family, a picture something that always like makes you smile, a picture that's like tied to a goal, and so it's pretty cool to see like people got very personal and we got to like really connect as a team. And so I think we've been using a lot of the storytelling components in different ways. Like sometimes it's very simple, like find something on your desk, and I think we've done this as a staff too. Find something on your desk that reminds you of something else, or like that brings back a happy memory. And so I think that there's a lot of room for that type of like, I would say like group intimacy that maybe you don't get as much in person, because like in person we're so like go all the time, and not that we're not like that in a virtual setting or with what is currently going on, but I think the situation kind of lends itself to have extra time for having those conversations.
There's one that we did in person that I can see still very easily translated in a virtual setting, but in a while ago, our staff used to do nuggets, like an opening nugget. And there was one where we had to show a picture of like something in our lives or a childhood picture or something and explain it. And so it was really nice to see everyone's kind of childhood photos or things that are extremely important to them. So I got to show them pictures of me when I was like 3 and I had preschool in Japan. And it was fun because sometimes they were like, Naomi, you never smiled in your pictures. I'm like, well, I was probably angry. But I also got to talk about like how much I moved around and how much like I do remember some things in my childhood. So there was a lot of vulnerability in these settings where I got to learn a lot about the same things about the staff as a whole and on a very personal level. So I think that we didn't do this exactly, but for my first year seminar class, we did have kind of a scavenger hunt to show us pictures. So the students were able to share their screen. First, it helped them really navigate the platform, but also they were kind of excited. They were kind of just like sharing screen. And they were excited to show something that they found, interesting. And sometimes I think that when you hit something, there's something about icebreakers that you hit on something very face value sometimes, but then when you go deeper and you give them an opportunity to retrieve something very personal to them, it makes it much more interesting. Right. So beyond like the favorite food, and I love that question because it's a really easy icebreaker question, but maybe why is it, or something that I really like to ask, like, what's the food you hate? Because they start talking about why I hated it as a kid and they still hate it. Right. So it goes into these very personal levels of the past and how they grew up. So those are the kind of things that I really enjoy for team building.
Yeah. Well, and I think especially when you do ask for feedback or like you ask for a discussion point, I think keeping it fun and like not keeping it only about like your name, hometown, and major every time, like people get tired of that. And like, let's be blunt, they're not listening, but they're going to listen for like your favorite restaurant because they might go, or like they're looking for those connections and those commonalities. But I love that you both also talked about like sharing pictures. That's something that we've done a lot. I've done in a lot of different settings too. A lot of us are involved in the National Association for Campus Activities, and I just got to facilitate an experience. And I remember the very first thing we did in our meeting was I had everyone bring a picture, and everybody had a time to tell a story. And we gave them like a solid 2 minutes to talk about it. And then we actually just did a similar activity in our, again, Chicago quarter class. But it gives people that chance to like feel like they're heard. And then I think the other thing that is cool about technology with it is if you can get a chat going on top of that, they can start to reaffirm each other and say like, oh my gosh, like I knew that too. And oftentimes when we'll do it, we'll ask people not to step in and talk over other people who might be presenting in like their time, but we'll encourage them to put it in the chat, because I think sometimes what happens, as we all know, is like somebody will steal the mic, right? They'll have like side quippy comments, or they'll just want to consistently contribute, and it turns into like the show for that person instead of being truly about the person who's sharing the story. So I think it's also important when you're thinking about like icebreakers in that setting, to make sure that you if your goal is to allow people to be showcased and spotlighted, create an environment that allows for them to do that, and so somebody can't really like steal their thunder, if you will.
I always like the storytelling as well. So we've done it where it's a mix of an icebreaker, but then you go further with the team building of asking those questions. Is two truths and a lie. And we've utilized Kahoot because sometimes it's awkward and it takes a lot of time for people to think. So we've asked for those things in advance, and then we were able to share a fun picture of them as well. And we put up there the 3 things that they submitted, and people had to guess. And so it was a fun way to facilitate. We were able to ask questions, or I've seen people send in fun facts about them or something quirky that no one else would know about them, and then someone facilitated and read them, and you had to guess who it was, and then people had the opportunity to ask for furthering details about that, or gives them something to talk about afterwards as well, because I think that's key, to give them engagement points when they leave, so that the team building doesn't just stay in the Zoom call, it can leave the Zoom call or whatever you're utilizing, and continue those connection points if you have a group meet or with texting and different things like that. So I think that is key when you think about team building as well.
Yeah, and Ellen, if I can, I really appreciate what you said there about extending team building outside of meetings. I think one of the things that people will oftentimes see is people will create like a Microsoft Teams page or a group me or a Slack group or a Discord channel, right? And they will assume that it is like the field of dreams. It's like, if you build it, they will come. It is not that. Like, somebody has to put a little effort into it to create an environment that people want to continue conversation, right? So like, you can create channels that are like fun topics, right? Or other things. Like, you've got to create a reason for them to go to that as well. And our students might not be old enough to understand the Field of Dreams reference, but Google it and you'll quickly understand it. Also, an Iowa reference from.
Yep. See you at Dyersville.
Right. Well, seems like we're starting to turn a little bit here, and we're, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about icebreakers. So are there any online resources? And Ellen, you talked a little bit about Kahoot there. But are there any online resources that our students can utilize for virtual team building that, are either free or low cost that they might be able to take advantage of?
For icebreakers, it's not necessarily team building. I mean, it is, icebreakers are team building in a sense. But for more like this, like fun, kind of like getting the group started, getting the group to connect, Scribble, which we've also done it as part of our programming. Scribble.io is basically like Pictionary. And I think you can have a maximum of 10 people, if I'm not mistaken. But it's basically Pictionary. It allows you to customize the words that come up in the Pictionary. So like I know that like even as a staff, like we played it as a smaller team, and we put in like words that were like DePaul unique or unique to like the group of people that were playing. And so that's pretty cool because everybody knows Pictionary. It lets you draw and it lets you like chat too. So it's pretty cool. There's also a lot of tools, and I wish I would remember the names of these in particular, but there's a website that allows people to submit responses. If you share the link, like if you're having a Zoom meeting, for instance, or even like through GroupMe, if you like post a question, like what are some, like what are 3 things that you would like our organization to accomplish this quarter? They can go to that website, type them in, and it will like anonymously submit the answers. But what it really does that is really cool is that it'll create a board. So like it'll like populate everybody's answers onto that website. And I think that those are pretty cool tools because it kind of helps people that are maybe not everybody is good at just like actively listening and absorbing the information. It allows people to also follow and have text to go along with whatever conversation is happening in a group setting.
I really like the Jackbox games. I've been a really big fan of them just for like my social life, but also I know that we've played Drawful, so it's just probably a little bit similar to Scribble.io. And I think a level of competition magnifies people's personalities, but it does build the team, right? Like a competition. Yeah. Sometimes with the Jackbox games, like there's a trivia murder party that it's trivia, but then also there's a component to the game that you have to either help or negatively impact the people that are also playing. So there's some level of kind of banter, and there's definitely a lot of like communication going on, but then it makes it very, very enjoyable. So I think competition always really gets people going, and they get really excited, and then it gives them an incentive to like trash talk the next time or say like win that next time, right? And so, I think that has really helped me get to know a lot of people just because I love the competition. If I suck at it, that's still okay, because you're still in that environment where it's safe to be bad at something and you'll still have fun, right?
Yeah, and like I said, we use Kahoot a lot. I think there's a lot of different functions of how you can utilize that, and it's free and easy to use. We've utilized, even within the Zoom function, if you just realizing what is all there. So like utilizing polls, or we've utilized the whiteboard function for doing Pictionary if you don't do it online. So that has worked well for us as well. And then I've even seen like our university utilizes it, and our dance marathon utilizes a shared playlist. We utilize mostly shared playlists on Spotify, and so people can add in their favorite songs, and that way we can use it at events and different things, but it also gives them talking points again to be like, oh, I love that song as well, and to see the commonalities and the shared experiences that they have within songs. And I know that there's a opportunity to use JQBX. I've used it a little bit, but you can basically queue up different songs that you want to share and y'all listen together. I know that our young professional group on campus utilizes that to kind of break up a Friday afternoon. And so that's worked well as well to engage our staff and faculty on our campus.
Yeah, I would agree with the Zoom functions. Something I'm looking to forward to using this fall with my first year team is going to be breakout rooms. So obviously being in a room with a bunch of people you don't know is going to be hard. And so trying to get them into smaller group discussions with, intentional prompts to hopefully they can get to know each other a little more. So excited to try that out. And something that the DePaul Activities Board also used in their retreat was the Netflix party. So they all sat down at the same time, watched I think a documentary, and then had a discussion afterwards. And so then they can come back and like use as a reference throughout this quarter too of like, okay, we talked about this, we watched this. And so it's kind of a nice reference point to kind of keep building off of throughout the quarter.
Yeah. So there's a documentary about event planning. So so there might be something out there that relates directly, like it's a fun activity, but it still like relates to the topic. And so like during the activity, they were like they were making comments about how like they see certain things happen at events too. And
that's neat. Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to also say, like, when it comes to people who are facilitating team builders, like sometimes it just takes a little bit of teeth pulling, and that's reality. Sometimes people won't want to engage right away, but it doesn't like you should kind of try and get people to check their like too cool for school attitude first and foremost. And sometimes they won't. Sometimes they just like with any physical on ground or virtual, some people won't want to engage, but it shouldn't quite discourage you. I know that there was a Netflix party that we had last semester, and there were a couple people, and my friend who was hosting it, she was just kind of commenting. No one was really engaging. She said something like, wouldn't it be weird? And they were watching Space Jam, and finally this person said, that would be really weird. And she thought it was she was just so excited that he engaged. And I think it's just a matter of not being discouraged and trying to, because as you know, students can sniff out the attitude that you have and they'll mirror it back at you, right? So if you're just as reluctant to do it, they're gonna not find any value in it as well. So I'm not saying be the cheerleader, because I like, if you're not a quite bubbly person, then you don't have to completely break your personality for it. But I think being enthusiastic, saying why this is important, and giving them that reasoning will help them to understand it, because they can sniff it out the second that you're not engaged as well.
Yeah, I think
not everybody's Ellen,
Listen, it's good to role model that behavior. Like, well, you said that earlier, like being vulnerable, like it's not your go-to thing, but if you're asking students to do that, then you as the staff member there need to do it, or the peers need to be vulnerable together. Because if you're gonna, as a leader, ask your other peers to do that, you should role model that right back for them. And so that's key. Even in team building, you have to do those different things. So
yeah, this is like the new version of, for those student leaders who have ever worked a promo table and has made a passing comment to someone and they completely ignored you because they had their headphones in. Sometimes it feels like, virtual team building is the new version of that. But, I'd give you the same advice that I would give to people who are tabling, like keep at it and try something new. Right? Yeah. Like if you're working a table and you're sitting behind it and you're on your phone and then you just so happen to look up and ask somebody to stop and talk to you, of course they're not going to stop. But if you try something new, like you stand up, you go stand next to the table, there's a higher likelihood, right? Same with facilitating. Like try something. If it doesn't work, try something new. Like figure that out. I think the other thing that's really important for this too, that we've talked about in other videos in this series, but it's worth repeating. It's very hard to be both an active and engaged facilitator and run the tech.
Yes.
Like you've even probably, for our viewers who have been watching, you've probably seen, like, I've looked over at this screen because I have a second screen right here that's managing it, but I've also probably done, I think, 50 live stream sessions at this point, but it's still like, it's distracting for people watching, it's just better received for participants when they can see the main core facilitator, like watching, actively engage, making eye contact, doing those things. So when you're able to, I think it's really key to continue to have like a back of house person to help run the tech side. Because I guarantee there is someone who would love to do it. It's not a get out of participating card at all. Like they'll still be able to contribute, but like as you're talking as the facilitator or as you're introducing something, there can be somebody else on the back end that's looking and really helping to facilitate that other part of it. So I think it's worth repeating for students as they start to create strategies around how to go about doing virtual team building.
Well, you're right, because our perception's reality a lot of times, right? And so if I don't know that Courtney's running this and I see her looking at that other screen, I'm going to maybe be like, wow, she's not feeling this. She's more busy with other things. And so people like let their perception become that reality when in reality, she still is engaged. And so I think I love having splitting out the different responsibilities, getting more ownership and buy-in from your members as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So as we head towards, to wrap up today's conversation, I'm curious if everybody might be willing to share one piece of advice you have for students who might be trying to facilitate team building virtually for the first time.
Do a sound check, a dry run. Mm-hmm. I think there's, like with any event, the second that you start to fumble, it gets a little bit awkward. You've been to events where you're like, that was a little hard to watch, right? And so I think there's some candidness about it. Like you can definitely still be like, that'll happen. Technical difficulties will always happen. And so I think being able to just be prepared as much as you can. And this is coming from someone who has adaptability and their top like number one strength. I'm like always rolling with the punches, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to roll with the punches and never know that they're going to come at me. I'm going to practice and I'm going to make sure that I have some semblance of what issues may come up. And so like, I love that, Rigo, you talked about how in Zoom, the names weren't alphabetical. And I wouldn't have thought about that probably until the moment that we tried it. And so things like that, just there's a lot that people can anticipate with events in general, but the virtual factor does create some room for practice for sure.
Oh, I would say kind of like going off of what Naomi said, and when you do fumble and when you do make those mistakes and when things don't go the way that you plan them, always being comfortable just like bouncing back and moving forward. Like there's no point in, because it just makes it more awkward if there are like moments where things don't go correctly when you're doing a team building activity or an icebreaker. It makes it more awkward if you like linger on something that went wrong as opposed to like just rolling with it. And I think also like focusing on the outcome. So like, yes, like maybe Courtney asked like, what was your favorite food? And I didn't specify, or like your favorite restaurant. I didn't say the name of any restaurant, but I still said like my favorite food. The outcome of it was for somebody else to learn about my food habits, or for me to like be able to like just share something about myself. And I think that's ultimately what mattered in that moment. So the same applies for any icebreaker. Like maybe you're saying 2 truths and a lie, they share 3 lies. Whatever, they're still sharing information about themselves. So it's like not that big of a deal if like team building activity or the ice, like don't get too caught up in the logistics of it and focus more so like on what the outcome or what the purpose of the activity is.
That's 3 lies. Then you wouldn't learn anything about them.
You can learn that they're a good liar.
I'd say one of the things, I mean, kind of goes along with the technology and like all the behind the scenes stuff is like have someone else like in the know on the plan. So whether it's like another officer, an advisor, like just someone else that has like run through the plan with you, run through the technology with you. So in case your computer crashes or you lose Wi-Fi, like all of these things are very real. And like making sure that someone else can help you follow through with everything and help you behind the scenes. Also, in case something weird happens, they can continue the meeting and be a co-host of the Zoom, things like that. And I think that would just be important now more than ever.
I think mine is silence is okay. And I think in a virtual space, that's really hard for people who have not facilitated an icebreaker, because even silence is awkward in person too, but it's a little bit easier. But in the virtual space, you feel like you have to fill it sometimes. And so just realizing that silence might be okay to let people think and give them that space, but then not to be afraid to call out people and say, hey, would you mind sharing what you're thinking? But just be okay with that silence at first.
Yeah, and I as I've been listening, I think I have 2 pieces of advice. First, ask your members what they want to see for virtual team building and how they would commit to that experience. Because even the process of polling and doing things that people are interested in, it just gets a level of commitment. So you're guaranteed to not be in it by yourself, right? Like if, we said, who wants to participate, or like send your ideas. And like, if we had multiple people say, I'd be willing to do virtual Pictionary, right? You now have a guaranteed audience. So when it's different than like you just as the facilitator introducing something, you've already built buy-in, right? Because they voted for it or they said, yes, they want to do it. So even doing a poll like beforehand to say like, which one do you want to do? Like maybe not, do you want to do it? Because the answer might be no, but ask like, which one do you want to participate in? Because you're building on that interest and commitment to participating. And then I think the other piece of advice that I have, I oftentimes will talk about team building and relationships and comfort in an organization like a snowball, right? Because if you've ever made a snowball, and I know all 4 of our universities that are participating in the series get a lot of snow. Well, you still get snow in Oklahoma. It just sometimes is a little wet, right? Well, it starts small. Well, I guess you could use hail too, right? It hails a lot in Oklahoma, but it's not the same concept, right? Or maybe a dust ball, like what is that called?
A dust ball, a tumbleweed.
Tumbleweed, like a tumbleweed here. But anyway, for the purposes of the analogy, thank you, Ellen. A snowball starts small, right? And you pack it and you layer it and it becomes bigger. Like, I like to think about relationship building and commitment to organizations in that same way. So it doesn't make sense to always like start with a big group, because you don't create a snowball that's 10 feet tall initially. You start with a snowball like this, right? So start your team building and your connections in small settings, like with one person, and then maybe do 2 people, and then go to 5, and Ellen's laughing because I just accidentally muted my mic in the middle of that. But like, build on it and have it go bigger, and like make your groups larger that way, because people will become more comfortable. And I think the other part of that too is that people oftentimes will switch groups in a meeting. And while, yes, there's value because you might learn somebody else's name, there's also a lot of value in sending, especially if you use that breakout room function, in sending people back to the same room over and over so that they can build on a relationship. I think our natural inclination is like, let's have them meet new people. And sometimes more isn't as good as deeper relationships, right? So send them back to the same thing, and like, remember what those rooms are and send them back in week 2, so that they can create that more meaningful relationship.
I even think with Courtney, with your snowball analogy, it's topics of team building too, like starting with the more like the easy things that people are more willing to share, and that you make those connections and then dive deeper after you have those initial connections and find some commonalities, because then it'll be easier to be vulnerable with each other and open up.
Yeah. Well, panelists, thank you all so much for joining us for today's series. We'll be back next week talking about marketing in a virtual environment at the same time in the same location, right? Your university's Facebook channel or on our YouTube live stream as well. But until then, everybody take care. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But we will talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.